this just adds diversity to your whole ability to leverage brain power, to leverage talent, to leverage hands, ears, eyes. There's different ways you can come at how you're going to resource your company.
My name is Carrie Damon. I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship Education here at Mars. I'd love to introduce our speaker who comes to us from Ottawa, so we're always delighted to bring her up here. She's such a talent that we have to import her. Margo Crawford is the President and CEO of Business Sherpa. She's a business leader with over 20 years experience in human resources and is a recipient of the prestigious Vision Awards HR Professional of the Year. One of the reasons we really like to have Margo come and speak to our entrepreneurial audience is that she also has a lot of experience with small companies and has even been an entrepreneur herself. She co-founded a successful startup in Ottawa called Meriton Networks, and over the span of 8 years, she raised $75 million in equity financing. She also led one of the quickest M&A transactions that successfully closed in just over 1 month. So she's a great speaker for this type of audience, and I'd like to give her a warm welcome.
Thanks very much, Carrie, and nice seeing everyone here. There's a few familiar faces from previous presentations, so great to be back here. In this session, I've done many, many talks about recruiting and how to recruit and so on, and certainly that's a big part of what I do. But another big part I spend a lot of time with, especially with new companies, is the planning, is how do you figure out what you need, when you need it, and I was really excited about this topic because I really feel that we're at another watershed moment, similar to that time that we were at back when LinkedIn was coming into play. And I feel really confident I'm going to talk about stuff that a year from now everyone's going, oh yeah, I bet. I'm sure of it. I really feel strongly about it, so I'm excited about the topic. And it really is that sense of what is this emerging workforce. I feel we're at a watershed moment. And the neat thing is, it's such a great opportunity for small companies who are really struggling with finding the talent and getting it right. So I'm really quite thrilled about this, and hopefully you'll find out a few new things from this session tonight. So what I really want to focus on is exactly that. I want to talk about the changing workforce, the landscape. It's such a challenging thing. It's hard to figure out what to do, what to get. It's hard to figure out where to find the people. And then, by the way, not just the startup companies, I'm dealing with a lot of mature companies that have been around for 25 years, and they struggle as soon as they hit a change, and you do have to change. That workforce, you know, enigma is really, really, really hard to get right. And there are a lot of things that are forcing and are coming into play that are causing that change to happen. So I want to talk a lot about that. And then, of course, I really want to think about how do we actually rethink now? What can we do differently to rethink how we plan for the workforce? So it's a little bit of a different flavor than what I've done traditionally, but bear with me and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So I want to talk about traditional models to start with. So the traditional model that we all know about is the bricks and mortar model. We've lived it. Its resources are hired. They are hired as full-time employees. They're hired in-house. You know, generally are working within your offices, within your walls, or maybe other facilities you have. There's some work that happens outside that's flexible, and you've got some telecommuting happening. But generally speaking, it's fairly limited to where you reside as a company. Some volume work might be outsourced to low-cost markets or other regions, and you might have a few service partners. That's really what the bricks and mortar model is. And why do we have this approach? It's conventional. It's what we've known for generations, really. It's you hire employees. You hire them at your office. Also, you secure those resources because this is how you're going to protect your IP. We really have a challenge moving off the sense of, you know, how else do you protect your IP than having native employees, make sure you lock it down, put all the technology around it, of course, use all your legal instruments to protect that IP. You know, and also that ability to collaborate around a water cooler. We know that that's the only way. We have to be close together. That's the only way we're going to be productive or creative. And of course, you can control and manage the resources when they're inside your walls. So we're very comfortable with this model. Let's see what I'm doing. And of course, the planning ultimately really is about mix and headcount. So what is the mix and what is the headcount that you need? So when you think about planning mix, I've used this slide before. Businesses have different inflection points, and depending on what stage you're at, you're going to have to face the milestones that you have to plan out over time. And here I talk about the different inflection points that you see in startup companies, from formation through to early revenue trials, whatever. And there's those technical milestones that you have to hit. Then, of course, you have those pesky financial milestones that we all have to hit. Whether that's financing rounds, seed money, or it's early revenues, strategic revenues, whatnot. And of course, the customer milestones that are attached to that. And I've focused a lot in the past on those organizational milestones, then kind of creating the map for you in terms of the headcount you need when you need it, that mix. And this still continues to be a very, very important idea. So you really need to think about that. The interesting thing is, this doesn't just happen for startup companies. It continues in mature companies. I'm in a lot of companies that have been around for a while, and all of a sudden they hit a business inflection point, whether they've got more opportunity than they can manage, or they've got less opportunity than they hoped for, and they've got a shift and change. So it's a constant cycle to think about what that mix is. The next piece, of course, is the headcount growth. So I can't tell you, I don't know a company that doesn't plan its headcount based on mix and revenues. You plan revenues, of course you think about, well, we've got to do these sorts of things, so therefore we need the headcount, but ultimately it all comes down to what revenues do you expect from that. You know, and ideally we've got this nice curve that trajects upwards and predictably and evenly and in a nice ramp. You know, and it's not always about those sales numbers. You know, and in fact, we know that a lot of companies have metrics that are based on the company performance metrics are things like, you know, revenue per head. Those are very common metrics that we have in place. The challenge, of course, as we know, is that revenues don't always go in that nice, even way. You know, we know that, and particularly in startup companies, you can have fits and starts in terms of revenue ramp. You can have a home run, and the next week, you know, it's going away on you. So you don't always have that even predictability. And the problem with this, of course, is that if you have planned your head count around assumptions on a revenue, you've better make sure you've got someone who's controlling the dial really tightly to be able to step on the brakes and step on the gas to adjust your headcount plans around that. And this is where you see a lot of companies getting out of control, and all of a sudden the CFO or the CEO declares the hiring freeze because we're out of control, and they are, because it's hard to adjust to the ebbs and flows of revenue. The other problem, of course, is that you are assuming that the talent that you're looking for appears right when you need them, that you can go and get them. All right? And you can plan. We've talked about that in the past, that you do need to plan and predict ahead of time, and you do. But guess what? It's still challenging. It's still hard to find the talent. I'm sure any company that's trying to find talent is struggling with this, big or small. So really, you know, what has happened is we've added maybe a few little flavors to this model, and we started introducing some remote locations. You know, you might have another location in another market that you set up, or you might have a couple of telecommuting arrangements to try to leverage more talent in different talent pools. You know, and really it's just trying to add more to the pool of resources you have outside of your geography. The problem is that this is still not addressing the fundamental issue of how you plan properly for a successful company. Still using the old conventional, well, I've got two factors I'll consider, mix and headcount and revenues. So those are pressures that are continuing on in this landscape for workforce planning. So I want to talk about a few other pressure points that everybody surely knows and experience. So we do know there are absolutely changing labor market demographics. This is not new. Everybody knows that. There are major, major talent markets around the globe, and certainly companies are leveraging them. Startups as well as not. And this is kind of showing that there's real economic differences in why you go to some of those lower labor cost markets. You know, over in the Asia world, down in South America, there's lower cost labor markets, or there was. And of course, you still see California out there with this big whopping dollar sign, and that continues to be true. Very, very tough labor market, and continues. So don't think that's your solution. The problem is, of course, is that these differences of these labor markets are getting even more dispersed. And the cost economics are changing. We know that in India and China, and I remember back in 2006, I was part of setting up a software development company in Shanghai. And the factor of labor costs was pretty astounding. That's pretty much going away. You have the cost of labor in those markets is increasing. So the economies are not necessarily there. So it's really kind of that being the solution. Just, you know, set up a development firm. It's no longer a solution. It's not the thing you can rely on to find your low-cost labor market. There's lots of other issues with it too, but that was one that drove a lot of the thinking. Okay, so what's happening in Canada? So Canada, we know it's a very geographically dispersed set of talent pools. We've got them all over the typical places, just the major city centers, and I'm talking generally about technology. This isn't from any study, by the way. This is me just going blah, 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 okay? So there's no data behind this. It's intuition, but it's pretty reasonably accurate, I would say. The interesting thing, and I'm finding this because I do have companies that I support in the US, and I've been doing it for quite some time. The Canadian culture is not a culture of mobility. And I test this out kind of around dinner tables and stuff like that and ask about where people are from and where they move and so on. In the US, you can almost talk to any family, and they'll say, oh yeah, like their whole family is dispersed all over the US. And they move, and they change, and they shift. They'll move from this city to that city and so on. It's very, very common culturally for them to move around. It is not true in Canada. You do not get movement. I mean, we'll get some. But you know, someone who's in Vancouver is in Vancouver. Even I'm in Ottawa. I cannot move people from Montreal to Ottawa. It's 2 hours. Absolutely not. That is culturally two worlds, and it just doesn't happen. So that's another challenge that we have. Let's just look at the GTA. So GTA, large pocket, and I have a lot of companies I'm supporting in the whole GTA. We know that it doesn't look like this, right, though? It looks like this. It's pocketed all over the GTA, and it is so hard. I have got companies in Mississauga, and I've got companies in Markham. They might as well be on two sides of the world. They cannot draw, for any length of time, talent pools to come across the city and go work over in their bricks and mortar over in this spot. So this continues to be a real challenge for companies, and I'm living it now. So this idea that you can just get people, it continues to be really tough. So let's talk about a couple of other challenges and changes, forces of change. One is technology. Okay? So when we start thinking about hiring for technology, first of all, the essential developer skills that you need, I can't keep up with it. I absolutely can't keep up with it. I remember many years ago, the hot jobs was this, it was something, and you label it, and everybody was after that talent. Well, it seems to me now that I can't keep up with it month over month, which is the latest technology that is the technology to have. And of course, this is just is due to technical advances. It's due to what customers demand. We have emerging customers who have constantly changing views on what technology they want. So, and the other element that comes in there, and I'm dealing with this a lot, I've got companies who have selected tools and technologies that are old. So when you're trying to hire in real talent, they don't want to be working on that stuff. They want to kind of go to where the newer stuff is. So that, again, continues to create a lot of pressure and difficulties. Another element is how enterprises work. We know this. We know that companies are looking at remote access. They are looking at cloud computing, any devices in any location. We know that we've got a whole lot of issues that come along with that with respect to security. I feel so sorry for all of the CIOs and the IT enterprise people trying to figure out how they're going to keep up with, how they're going to continue to lock down and make their enterprise secure. It just is constantly a challenge. So, and of course, we do have to think about that because we have to protect our IP and we have to protect our information and data. We know that. And of course, what we have right now, it's just the lock it down strategy. You know, keep at it, keep locking it down, control the access, make sure you get all of the IP protection you can with agreements, you know, use every legal device you have, contractual advice with employees, you know, continue to use all the security technologies that you have. It's really almost a game. So I want to just spend a bit of time on this because this is an area that's fundamentally keeping us, our mindsets locked into, we can only hire here mentality and use our workforce within these walls because this is a huge driver of that, the IP security. Okay, so we know that there's the different levels of, you know, you've got that core technical IP. We also have the corporate IP, that knowledge, the corporate business information, customer information and data, and of course there's employee, you know, information and data. And all of that comes under the purview of how do we lock it down. So there's been all sorts of strategies to do that. So you'll see how much I'm dating myself because anyone here who smiles, they'll know about don't let anybody see the phone list. I mean, it happened, right? I was back in the 90s in technology companies. That was the one thing that they protected more than anything. They sure didn't want anyone having the phone list so someone could go and raid their talent. So these are a whole raft of these. I don't need to go through these. But what we do know is there's all kinds of things happening that are continuing to chip away at this. Chip away at, you know, how we can really secure our IP and keep our assets well protected. I was talking to someone, they said, you know, throwing their hands up in the air, you know, when RCA security for secure ID, right? I mean, really the platform for the most secure type of device to protect your IP was hacked. And they're like, you know, what do we do? That two-factor authentication was the standard for that. And so all of this to say that this continues to be a major challenge for companies. And it's important because it's also really forming how we think about how we plan out our model. So it's kind of getting back to that sort of so what factor. It does matter. It's really causing us to stay in one state of mind, but we're not solving the problem necessarily. So with all of that, I do want to talk. So these are the challenges. And as I mentioned at the outset, I talked several years ago about that social media trend and what is coming along now and what I sort of see. And it was definitely fluffy at the time and foo-fooed. And I don't know if that's for us. And I think anybody in this room would acknowledge that that has really entered the business, right? You would not leverage that in all sorts of different ways. So what I really feel is coming along now, and again, it'll sound fluffy and trendy, is crowdsourcing. So when I say crowdsourcing, people, I'm sure, say fluffy. It's just kind of a political tool. You know, it sounds nice. It's socialistic almost. Let's figure out how we can, you know, microfund. Let's figure out how we can share ideas and so on and so forth. You know, and I certainly felt that way too. But it does have a real impact in business. So I've been spending a lot of time on this, and I will tell you it's interesting. I got all this ready, and coming down the train, I was going through stuff, and I got my pre-issue, the electronic issue of April's Harvard Business Review. This is a huge feature in Harvard Business Review, this whole concept. So and actually, some of the stuff I'm profiling, they're profiling. So let's just talk about what we think about crowds. So we know that we have a crowds gathering, and of course we see, you know, companies reaching the crowd, and we saw the platforms coming out that businesses use to reach the crowd, right? And we're familiar with this. This is not new stuff. So phase two, and we also know this, that the crowds are now gathering. Right? They're getting into groups and pockets and user groups and communities and so on. And again, we do have companies reaching those groups where they're going, but they're also sharing their own ideas. They're influencing. They're creating. These crowds are doing things. They're not just sitting there. and gathering and sharing and swapping ideas, you know, at night on the computer. So phase 3 is we know that the crowds now have said, okay, now I'm going to reach out. I'm not just going to have people reach into me. I know there's funders out there. I want to influence political minds and have political influence. I want to change the world, communities in the world. And of course, I'm going to also reach back to companies. So what's happening now, of course, is what we're seeing is these relationships are becoming monetized. And I want to spend a lot of time on this because I think it is very, very critical, fundamental, will become a success factor for businesses to be able to figure out how you monetize and leverage the monetized relationships of crowds. And of course, you can see how this segue connects with how do we get the talent to us, right? You know, I'm sure you can connect those dots. But really, it's all about how do we now leverage this. So what I want to talk about is companies have problems, and there's a crowd. All right? And really, what we're starting to see is there's ability to come together. And I borrowed actually some of the labels. I had different ones when I started. I thought I liked the labels, and some of these are in the Harvard Business Review as well, so I won't take credit for these. But the exact same concept of different types of activities that happen in those monetized relationships. So we have contests, collaborative communities, complementers, and labor crowds. All right? So if we think about contests, all right, we've seen this before, and this is interesting. So we talk about way back, 1714, the Longitude Prize. And this was a prize that was issued by the British Parliament because they could not come up with, the most eminent scientists could not come up with a solution of how to figure out where they were at longitude at sea. Couldn't figure it out. So they put a prize out to anyone. It was an open call. And really, what they ended up with was 100 submissions. They did finally get a solution that was a chronometer, and it was using triangulation. And the answer came from a farmer, from a clock worker and a woodworker in the countryside. Not one of Sir Isaac Newton was one of the scientists who couldn't figure this out. So that power of a broader community than the brains that you can gather around you was shown at that time. So what does that mean? So we're looking at this. So really what we're starting to see is that there's problems that, and I won't read through this, but basically there's problems that, you know, can be just pieces of a bigger problem, but they can be defined. You don't know what the solution is. You want to experiment with multiple solutions. And, you know, these are really good tools to be able to use to look at, you know, very narrowly sort of defined problems. There's lots of ways you can protect your IP. And the way I put it to someone today, if you can imagine, in your IP, instead of thinking about, you know, here's my IP, think of a Rubik's Cube, okay? Take out pieces and have people solve little pieces of it. What you need is you need the person who knows how that cube goes together. Right? And that is another way of protecting your IP, is segmenting it out. And yes, get all of that brain power at it, but make sure in-house you've got the person who knows how that goes together. That wouldn't be me, because I could never do the Rubik's Cube. So anyway, so what's interesting is for this type of, the reason why this is such a powerful tool is it doesn't speak to the normal incentives that you see. Things like, you know, I want to be hired, I want a job, I want to work at this company, I want stock options. It's actually speaking much more to the stature within a community. You know, I'm part of this scientific group, and I'm going to go after that problem, and I'm going to, and it's a contest. I want to win. So what is very cool now is, so it's an old concept, but now technology platforms. The technology platforms that are now emerging to allow and to support these types of contests this is what is becoming mainstream. So I've got a bit of a profile on Topcoder, and again, I had looked into that, and that's, I think, profiled if I'm not mistaken. But essentially, these platforms are being developed that will allow these companies to come together, and they really allow that sort of coming together of you've got a problem, let's get it out to a community. They have all the systems in place to protect IP, to create the reward system and funnel it through. So to help with these problems. So a couple of case studies. There was Merck and Kaggle is one of these platforms. They ran an 8-week contest, $40,000 in the contest prize. And what they were trying to do is they were trying to provide, figure out the most promising chemical compound to come together that would test for future diseases. Very, very sophisticated problem. And of course, they parceled it in such a way that wasn't going to reveal, the whole. They had 238 teams submitted 2,500 proposals. And they ended up getting, the winner came from the machine learning approach. And by the way, a technology and a knowledge that they don't have at Merck. It's not something that they really have in-house. It came from way out in another community. The next one I've got there is Colgate and Tongle. So this was actually interesting. This was more on the marketing side, but an 8-week contest, $17K. And they were developing the Speed Sticks Handle It campaign. So they ended up using, so the winner, the profile that they ended up getting, they had a submission. They used this for their ad buy at the Super Bowl. This campaign, and it ended up being ranked 12 out of 36 of when they do all the reviews of the Super Bowl ads. $17K, it's pretty good cost there in terms of what they did. So the idea of contest is going to be something I wanted people to have in their heads. Collaborative communities. So we've seen this before, of course. This is not unfamiliar. Remember, for those who do, in 1998 when IBM said, okay, that's it, we're not developing anymore. We're not using our own web infrastructure platform. And they went out to Apache, which was a group of web developers who used open source, and let them develop the platform and the offering and the product that they wanted to use, and it outperformed all other offerings. So the idea of having those collaborative communities, I know that that's something that really, when you think about it, we're familiar with. They're more projects than products or problems. And there's tasks within the projects, and there's kind of almost a defined routine of how that group behaves and how they collaborate. I mean, just think of Wiki and just think of how you collaborate in school papers. It's there. That concept is there, and that online collaboration. You do stay away from your IP on this because they're just collaborating, but there's pieces of what you need to do that aren't at your core IP that you certainly can put out to a collaborative community. And again, the crowd, of course, responds to this. They contribute to the ideas, and they deal with the social technical problems. And the communities that you're talking to, they can actually be your customers. They can be market segments. They can be global communities, whatever. And they self-govern themselves typically. So, of course, the platforms we see are platforms that are either proprietary to businesses. So you sort of start seeing this, the Starbucks My Idea. There's Dell Computers doing that, Vodafone, Nokia. Open Idea is a platform that allows for companies to say, I'd like to do this, and we're not going to have a proprietary platform. We'll use our own. A good case study here is Lego. And for those of you who might have looked at this, if you look at Mindstorm and those things, Lego has been doing this for quite a while, where they have their own proprietary platform. And they allow people to submit ideas, Lego ideas, and for their robotics and so on. And there's prizes. If you get a certain number of supporters, they're going to give you some revenue stream. So the concept of, yes, let's get collaborators into what our product needs to be is definitely out there. It's not that new. Complementers. Of course, we've seen this before. iTunes. iTunes does this. We know that they have a platform and they have a product suite that they're connected to. And of course, what they want in the case of complementers is they want as much volume as they can possibly get to get all these different functionality that adds to their product. So someone has the iPhone, they want as many, many apps that can get on there as possible. So the idea of complementers through APIs and so on has become pretty much mainstream. I think most people know that that's a possibility, or you've got a product that's connecting into a platform. So again, we know that we can, you want to add to your core product, but what's important in this case is having a lot of volume. Well, it's hard for you to go and hire all the resources to create all that volume. Could you imagine? You wouldn't compete. So instead, the solution is to provide many solutions, not just one solution, to add to your platform. And it's done through APIs, typically, those hooks into your platform. And API is, anybody? I have it written down.
Application Programming Interface.
Thank you. Application Programming Interface. So basically, you have a platform, and it just allows, I'll use my layman's term, a hook into that. Because you do have to allow these people into your core platform. So they develop hooks that allow them to do that. Good enough? Yeah? Okay. So the crowds are connecting into these platforms, and they're creating, and again, it's that monetized relationship. They are creating apps. They're creating different types of technology that adds to the platform, adds to your core product, but it's not your core. It's that value-added piece to your technology. And sorry, again, there's lots of platforms now. So these are actual platforms that allow for that you can create and partner with as companies to be able to develop these types of opportunities so that you can create a product that has the functionality that allows those complementers to come into your product. Case study that I have here is with Ford, and they used Bug Labs to create OpenXC. And OpenXC is basically a technology where in their cars allow people to use the technology that's in the car, the computers with all the metrics and so on, and add it into your iPhone or whatever. So this is starting to come into mainstream now too. So again, the technology is there to help monetize those relationships of the crowd and the company. Okay, so the next one is what I feel is most exciting. And it really is going into the concept of crowd labor markets. And this is where I really feel we are at the very front end, the edge of this becoming a much bigger thing. All right, so when we think about crowd labor, what this talks about, this is beyond Monster. This isn't resume search or whatever. These are platforms that are basically pre-qualifying pools for you. So what they do is they focus on securing partners for you in advance so that when you come and you say, I need a Java developer for this, in their platform, they are creating the pool of Java developers who are available on demand when you need them. And these platforms have all sorts of systems and technology in it. So they have, they develop reputation and skill metrics. So as someone's used, there's a feedback loop. Goes back and starts building up the reputation of this developer and starts building up the metrics of the performance indicators of are they solid. So they're pre-qualifying these pools for you. And these are people who've put this, they're out there in the crowd, I'm ready, and there's also a bidding process. So you put out your need, the bidding process commences. They have escrow, they have ways of mitigating recourse for non-performance. So they have escrow payments, so if you're not satisfied. So it's way more than just looking at the Monster and posting your job up there and saying, I'm going to go search and go through 2 million resumes. And to me, what is really, really important is that the platform is being developed for the filtering and the quality and the pre-qualification and the readiness for, I need it now, I've got a peak, and I face this with particularly with the companies I work with that are project-based, that they bid on projects and all of a sudden they've got to build up resourcing in a certain area, it's only going to last a certain time, and they've got to create for a period of time, and they need those resources, but they ebb and flow. And it's such a challenging reality for companies right now. So the idea of the spot labor is the crowd labor markets is absolutely presenting itself and coming forward. So the crowds are from any discipline at all in the community. And the reach is global. It goes all around the planet because, of course, we can do that now. So you're not worrying about that. And the interest for people participating in this is in alternative work relations or supplementing, or sometimes just want to do this type of stuff. I do this all day. I'd kind of like to do this work. It's almost hobbyish, but I can get paid for that. And the major focus here is on right now, where it's at right now, it's all on micro tasks. So companies defining very, very sort of you know, this is going to be a lot of small, small bits of labor. And this is where it's standing right now, but you can only imagine where this is going to with these types of platforms. So development communities are very well suited to moving into this stream. And again, there's actual platforms on this, where these platforms are built out so that you can access the spot labor. So what they're doing on the one side is bringing in communities from around the world, putting them through their systems and making sure they're qualifying and filtering their labor pools. And then on the other side, companies bidding, putting out calls for work. Amazon's Mechanical Turk actually is quite the one that's most familiar to me. The others are not as much, frankly, but where they're looking at a lot of people work that just needs a lot of arms, eyes, heads, legs, whatever, on some activities. So Amazon Mechanical Turk was used by the National Geographic. It was fairly recently, I think it was in the fall. And what they were doing is they had 28,000 people, a labor pool, going through satellite imagery of Mongolia, and they were looking for the tomb of Genghis Khan. So they had all of these individuals just streaming through satellite imagery, and they did that through Mechanical Turk. So it's pretty phenomenal, the power that I'm seeing and imagining here. This one is, I don't know if you can read that, Samasource. Samasource, this is kind of neat. So this is has got a real social side to it. So Samasource has developed a micro-work model. And what they specifically do, it's around computer tasks. And they are specifically looking at labor pools in very depressed economies of the world, where all they need to do is get a computer in front of a person. And then that's the community that they're focusing on. And so it's trying to, forget about charity, let people work, let them feel proud about what they're doing. You can put a computer in front of a person, and again, dealing with those micro tasks. And so it's a platform again, but they've got a real focus on in particular, a lot of women in third world countries where they're trying to create work opportunities. So that's the platform. So really at this stage, it's very much, like I said, at that micro task level, but the platforms are, but it's not just that. There's coder, designers, et cetera there. So it's really quite interesting seeing what the power of what this can offer. Just briefly, I want to feature the Topcoder case that I was looking at, and it was done with Harvard Medical School. And again, this is now going to be profiled. You'll see it in the April Harvard Business Review. So the Harvard Medical School was looking at a very complex problem. And what they were trying to do was basically, they were looking at DNA sequencing. This is way beyond me, but it was and it was very hard to figure out the alignment. And previously they'd used platforms called Megablast, which I don't know what that is. All I know is that processed 100,000 sequences to a high degree of accuracy, but took 2,000 seconds to execute. Horrible. Means nothing to me. But the interesting metric there was that they had a full-time resource at Harvard working at this. He or she improved the performance to 400 seconds. So they ended up engaging with Topcoder, and they put together a contest. And as you can see, what they ended up paying in prize money was $6,000. And over the course of, I think it was only like a couple of weeks, they had 733 registrants and 102 members submitting working algorithms, and from there they were able to award a prize. I don't know who it went to. And basically that solution that performed hundreds of times faster than what they had previously received with a higher degree of accuracy and reduced the execution time to 16 seconds. Now, to me, that's very powerful when you start thinking about what is that opportunity. So I'll just show you quickly. This just comes from the Topcoder site, only because what I really liked about this is they position everything as, it's really speaking to that competition side, that stature side. So they've got like the bug races, or in the algorithm analytics, they've got the marathon matches. So just that whole, like, it's a game, it's a contest, meeting and competing with your esteemed, colleagues, raising up that element of it. So it's a very neat, I think, prospect. I'm just checking my time. I'll start going through here a little bit more quickly. Just a couple of others I'll feature for you. I think people have seen 99 Designs, perhaps. That's more in the marketing end. So there's been a lot of work on the marketing side of things. 99 Designs is basically a bid for logos and for marketing materials, and really trying to get that community to be able to participate. And they monetize that relationship. You can submit a bid. I don't know how many people have heard of Threadless. For those who have not heard of Threadless, Threadless is a company in its own right. And basically what they do is they have a community of artists who submit their art, and then you can go on and select art to go on a t-shirt. And they sell the t-shirts. So by doing that, they are funding artists. People are getting $10 t-shirts that are absolutely unique and putting out. And it's a $35 million business. It's quite major. It's amazing. So that's in its own right, that view. Quickly, I'll go through these couple more slides because I do want to leave time for questions. This is actually from the Harvard Business Review article. I saw that, so I thought I'd put that up there. And it just sort of talks about what type of work do you want to put to a contest versus a community versus a complementer or labor work. So I won't spend time on that. It's not mine anyway. So fundamentally, what I really want to try to get to here is thinking about those workforce models. And you have that internal team. You do need that internal team, of course. You need to know they are going to be motivated by the traditional incentives and so on. They're going to use your tools. You'll want to focus on culture and fit for your organization. And you know, they'll often have very specific experiences that are fairly narrow, but you need them. And then, of course, that external team, the crowd, these are intrinsic incentives. These are things that they want to learn, explore. They want to do something different. The technology platforms are there and emerging. We're on the front edge of this. So those online crowdsourcing platforms are going to be what people will be talking about, I'm sure of it, in a year from now globally. So this just adds diversity to your whole ability to leverage brain power, to leverage talent, to leverage hands, ears, eyes. There's different ways you can come at how you're going to resource your company. So very quickly, I'm just going to go through a couple of these. I won't focus on the IP anymore, other than I do believe that you can protect your, another way of protecting your IP is parceling it out and making sure what you have is a person who knows how to do that cube. And the idea of when you are planning, you're thinking of fit, competencies, et cetera. That's going to be very important. So how do you plan? So this looks familiar, right? I mean, we think in hierarchies. You're at this level, then you're at this level, and hopefully you'll move up. Don't worry, I don't want you to see the details of this. Obviously, it's just to be clutter to make the point. But we think in silos, this department, that department, et cetera. We think internally, frankly. You know, who are we going to hire? And we think in terms of titles and labels. And I hear this daily. You know, oh, I need this. I remember one company that you supported, and honestly, it gravitated from we need a director of marketing, to we need a director of product management, to we need a director of business development, to we need a sales engineer, to we need a marketing communicator. It just circled around, and it really depended on who was in the room, and also who was the stakeholder we were caring about that week? Was it a customer? Was it an investor? Was it a whatever? And the only way they could really think about it was in labels, not what do we need to do as a business. So very quickly, just to go through these, things that we have to do as a business is you do have to lead and manage your business. This is core. You'd have all the different elements. You have to manage talent. You have to manage finances. You have to provide leadership. And you have to make sure it operates efficiently. Okay, so that is core, and those are some of the titles that go along with that. We have to create what the product or service will do. You have to create what it is, right? So we know that that is core, and that means a lot of things. We have to know how it will be experienced and how the consumers are going to use it. You want to define the features and the functions, define how it is different and why it is better. So you do need that in your organization. Okay, so product management, CTOs, et cetera. You need the planners, the doers who'll make it happen. Okay, so these are our typical resources we think about. You know, do the work that is planned. You know, how is the product? How is it going to work internally and out to consumers? organize and manage the resources. You want to keep everything on track and to the plan. So you need that ability to keep it on track. And of course, you need resources to do that. So, you know, that's where you get your development teams. I'm just saying, if I can, so finally, sorry, of course, you have to get into the hands of customers. Somehow, you have to reach them, right? So you do need to introduce it to the market. You have to get companies and people to try it, and you have to get companies to buy it, and then you have to get to support the company. So these are all core, you know, fundamental things a company has to do. So the thought process, when you think about it, is that all comes together. This is the core. What do you need inside? And thinking in the broader landscape of possibility of how you can come at these different things. What resources do you need internally? And they certainly are going to touch on these 4 buckets. But what do you need internally that's going to be your core team? And then really, and that will be some of your developers, that will be some of your staff, et cetera. But then really thinking critically about what do you need that can be that flex team. And the flex team, I'm hoping I'm leaving you with a message is coming. There's a crowd out there that you can leverage. And I hope one of the things you bring in your core is you get your resources, whether it's your manager of development or it's a project manager or it's a very strong admin or whoever, who can really manage and plan all of these contests, collaborators, and have relationships, know who all of those communities are, how you're going to manage those, and making sure you do it well, do it really well, because that will be a workforce no employer, big or small, will be able to ignore if you're going to compete. So I do have a whole bunch of other slides, but no time, and actually they're fairly repetitive from previous sessions, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But the slides are always available, and they just talk about tactics. But maybe I can throw it out to questions. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Margo. We'll also put her old video in the LinkedIn group this week so that you can see some of those other slides. And because I noticed a lot of what you've done is refreshed, so that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
And if there are any questions, can you guys come up to the mics just so the people on the webcast can hear?
Hi, thank you very, very much for the presentation. And I had a question about something that you said earlier on about Canadian culture and that people don't move as compared to the U.S. culture. And I was wondering if you're speaking from the perspective of here in Ontario, because I have a fair bit of experience with Eastern Canada, particularly Newfoundland, and where it's known culturally that people leave in droves to go to other parts of Canada to work. So I just was wondering.
I would agree with that,
yeah.
And certainly I think that I've experienced that. I also know some organizations that have gone down and set up down there because they know there's talent pools. Right. I guess what I'm just saying is that, what I have found is that people do maybe make a move and then stay, but in the US, it's pretty common every few years, oh, they're living here now, and I'm in Florida, now I'm in California, now I'm in Boston, now I'm in Richardson, Texas. Like that mobility, and the only thing I raise it about is that as an employer, if your assumption is, well, we can just get people to move here, right. I think that is fragile. And yes, you will get some. I was at a school board once, and in fact, that's exactly what we did. We went down and did a talent sweep when I was hiring teachers, believe it or not. We had to go out of province to go and get teachers to come into province. That's really old. But I agree. It's just risky to say that can be a sustainable strategy.
Right. And just one quick follow-up. Where do you see the changing demographic, immigrant population, that kind of people coming into Canada? How does that fit into
Well, actually, I think it fits in quite well to this merging, because as we probably know, there's a couple of groups that have a very tough time right now, I would say, with employment. And some of it is the immigrant community, and the other is youth. Mm-hmm. And I look at this, and I see opportunity, huge opportunities. They're saying, okay, if for whatever reason you're not giving me a shot, that's okay. Because, and I see this, I do a lot with youth. I see kids coming out of school now, holy smokes, they are risk takers, they are entrepreneurs, they are going to just take care of business, and they'll go and they will do anything. They don't have any notion that they're going to sit in a company for 7 years. I mean, I'm feeling very old because that's my trajectory, but that's the reality. And I would say that's very true of the immigrant community. Huge number of entrepreneurs, a huge skill. And now I think platforms are out there so I think it's almost kind of going to become much more level.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated hearing about the crowdsourcing and
Great.
Drawing from talent from there. That was
good,
great.
exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So with regards to Canadian culture and US culture, Americans being more free to move or willing to move, I've worked in both Canada and the US, and my question to you is not really about moving, but about have you found that American companies are more willing to train employees as opposed to Canadian companies? Because that's been my experience. They're willing to take you on if you have maybe not quite the skill set, but the fundamentals are there and they'll just train you. So, and
go ahead.
Part two is why are Canadians unwilling to move? And that's it. Thank you.
So it's interesting. My experience that I've had in the companies I've been in, generally speaking, they've hit more competitive job markets. Mm-hmm. So to a certain degree, forced to move. I think of California right now, it's still a very competitive job market. So immediately that willingness to say, look, I'll get someone in and train them, that's got to be a solution. I think that is becoming more mainstream. But I find that sort of, that appetite for training ebbs and flows with job market. So I'm seeing some companies now where, yes, they're starting to recognize that, stop putting this huge long checklist of all must-haves. Let's get down to what is really, I really need. And because guess what? By the time it's taken us to find that perfect list, you could have had someone in, develop them, train them, be skilled, and farther ahead. And they're starting to realize that. So I can't comment if it's more of a US versus it's more connected to the labor market.
Okay.
Does that answer both
Yep.
of the questions? Okay.
Yep. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
You've given us crowdsourcing and then go into crowd labor markets. We get more and more people doing smaller and smaller tasks. Do you see that we're eventually going to see the end of bricks and mortar and have more literally virtual companies? Otherwise, they're there, they form, they find the need, they fulfill it, they get as many people to work on every imaginable task, and then when they've pretty well maxed out the market, which instead of after 5 years, 10 years, we're probably talking in much more smaller increments, and then they dissolve and then morph into something different. Do you see something like that happening?
Well, I thought about that actually, and it's interesting. I kind of been thinking about the controversial decision that Marissa Mayer has recently made of Yahoo. She said, that's it, no more work at home, get in here. And that's easy to vilify that and say that's just against every, and by the way, that's nice that you've got your nanny suite, and it sounds evil. But I also thought about that because Yahoo, as an example, I have no belief at all that they are trying to become Google. Google wouldn't have let her join them, first of all. They have to reinvent themselves. They have to be something different. And I can only imagine that incredible need to have close collaboration at that core is part of the driver there. I also know there's a lot of metrics that were suggesting very low productivity, et cetera. And I don't think that will ever go away. I think there will always be an element of that coming together. I just think that core will be redefined. Because of all of these pressures on the workforce, I mean, just look at the GTA. You cannot find the right location to be, period, if you're picking a spot for your office to set up. So, but is it okay if what you're talking about, all I really need at my core is a team of 20? And we see a lot of successful companies that are that size, a lot of successful companies. And it's really leveraging those other resources. So I think it's that refinement. So I do think the notion of that's the only thing you're going to have is bricks and mortar, I think it will be very different. That's my prediction anyway. Oops, sorry.
And I guess the other question would be, if Americans are more inclined to move about, will we see that Canadians, especially Torontonians and people in GTA, will figure, well, wait a minute, instead of having to move about, I'll just get other people out there to deal with things. I like where I am right now. And just essentially maximize what they've got here, do what they have to, create the company, dissolve the company, create a new one, and innovate that way.
I think it absolutely is the case. I don't think that all of a sudden people say, oh, okay, the way to solve this is I have to, move every 2 years to different provinces or go to the States, because I can't do that anyway. And to the same point I made to the lady before you is that, the idea that you have to move to, and you see that. I see that particularly in Ottawa, where there's a lot of people who, with the tech decline, has found themselves unemployed, reinventing themselves. These platforms create tremendous opportunity for that, both as a company being created, but also as a worker.
Thank you very much.
You're
Very
welcome.
eye-opening.
Thank you.
Hi. Great thing to keep in mind while building up, getting the job done that needs to be done for the team. But a couple of questions and challenges which I would say I faced when starting out to build a company or a product. Now, just to give you a background, I was trying to build a web-based service. And I had tried to go in the direction of, I would say, sending out the work requirement into a crowd and trying to see what comes, just with, I would say, some definition of what I was looking for and trying to see what comes back. Now, initially, as a startup company, when I myself and my, say, core team is still trying to define how the look and feel of our product is going to be like, it resulted in a bit of, I would say, redundancy of work. Later on, we changed our direction. We changed our, path in a way, or what we were trying to offer. So, from your perspective, do you have any thoughts of at what point of time we need to be as a company before we can fully leverage the crowd? Because in a way, having a handle on a work that we have sent out there, it's very difficult.
So it's interesting. So as this comes out, I think it'd be worthwhile becoming more and more informed of what works well. First of all, what type of crowd engagement works well, depending on what you do and how you do it. But the little bit that I've read, it's been very clear that that ability to define the problem, to genericize the problem, and also to translate the problem. Because oftentimes your nomenclature or your language is not accessible by some people. You have to change the language so they understand the problem. So I think what we will come to see is that ability to do that well is probably going to be at the heart of success versus the right timing. I don't think that there's any one answer to that, it's this or that. But I think the ability to be able to really, really figure out how you define the problem, how you put that open call. And again, some of these platforms now that are emerging, I think really help and support that. They work with you, right? Rather than, I'll just put it out to the community and see what I get. So I think that just stay abreast of it, I would say. I can't tell you, here it is, don't do it until such and such. Okay, over here.
Hi, I really love that concept of crowd labor markets, and it sounds really exciting. And to support a lot of your facts that you put together, I've spent some time with Elance and looked at the various people that are actually submitting proposals for various requests. And I see a lot from China, I see a lot from India, and I'm really starting to see a lot from the US as well.
Yeah.
I don't see that many resources that are bidding from Canada, but I'm sure that will come as it starts to pick up, which is really exciting on its own.
Yes.
But the question I have for you is, moving forward, I know this is an emerging concept, and it's something that maybe Fortune 500 companies are probably not embracing as great as maybe some of the lean companies that just don't have the resources, and they just are forced to go out and maybe compromise some of their IP or the perceived IP that they have out there. When do you think, or do you have any forecasts for when do you think this will start to become a concept that is mainstream.
So you're asking me to actually put it down, huh? So hard to say, but what I will tell you is I do remember when I started introducing, and it's not, I didn't introduce LinkedIn obviously to Canada, but when I started talking about it, and it was a lot of head scratching, writing down. At the time, I had been doing a lot of work in the US, and that was about a year ahead of this, and really seeing its adoption there and its use and going, oh boy, that's different. And Canada was about 18 months behind that, I would say, you know, in terms of really, really adopting it and you know, leveraging it. So I actually think it will be faster, because I think the pressures on businesses generally are getting harder and harder, particularly for small companies. I think about it, and sorry, I shouldn't say just particularly for small companies. It's small and large, where they are trying to grapple with how do they resource things and how do they find the right talent for what they need and the problems and the costs. Everybody has pressures on profitability. Small companies are struggling so much with how do I find talent when I can't afford it? I can't afford to hire someone, you know? And so they're almost, it's not even compromise. It's like, I don't have any other solutions. I remember coming to sessions before and people say, how do I hire? I don't have money. You know, should I get volunteers? Should I do whatever? And so I think that the financial pressures will actually escalate this, in my view. I think this we'll start hearing so much about this over the next year. We'll see.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Thanks very much, Margo. Lots of food for thought about the now rapidly changing world of talent. It's really accelerating, and lots of changes and things to think about. For anyone, just a reminder that we have about 25 tools and templates in the Entrepreneur's Toolkit in the HR section. So if you need help with some of the day-to-day HR stuff, it's there, and we'll post some great videos we have in the LinkedIn group on the topic too. Thanks very much, Margo. We appreciate it.